Thanks, and congratulations on your new startup, Steve. That sounds like an interesting line of business, and certainly good personal service is something that's very much valued these days. So everything you can do to contribute to the recognition of that is great. Okay, my name's Rob Dewing, and like Vicky, I sometimes have trouble remembering which organisation I'm representing on any given day. This morning I've already represented FSB, NFBP and a few others. But what actually makes me money is building websites for people, specifically WordPress websites, or I say building, actually maintaining and helping people to develop websites as well as building them. So over the last few months, NFBP's had quite a number of different presentations in these business support hours. I did a quick scoot through them, and actually almost half of them have been about various forms of online activity, whether it's social media or content marketing or search engine optimization. And I'm not sure I would recommend Matthew's strategy of using ostrich farming as your way of reeling in people for a tech support function, but I can understand where he was coming from. However, we did search engine optimization a few weeks ago. We did content marketing more recently. But in all of these presentations, there was a theme around getting engagement through your website and keeping your website up together and appealing. So that's what I'm going to speak about today. I'm not a visual graphic designer, although I know what I think looks good, and I know how to help people specify what they want from a graphic designer, whether it's one of my subcontractors or someone of their own choice. I'm also not a deep programmer. I'm not writing databases and systems that call those. I'm the guy in the middle that actually puts the website together. And in the course of doing that, I get to think a lot about the content that's on people's website and the structure of those websites and the way that they interact with the user, the overall user experience. So I want to talk today about some of those kinds of aspects of putting together a website. Okay, so I'll screen share the dreaded PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully that's now come through.
Yep.
So our theme for today is connecting through your website. We've heard about connecting through online networking and connecting through LinkedIn and so forth, but today we're talking about connecting through your website. So I want to start with a, right, what do we want to get more of through our website in connecting? What is it we're after? I want to encourage you to think about the purpose of your website, because that purpose will help influence the way that you structure your content on there. Of course, we all ultimately want more sales from our website, but there are many different ways in which our website helps us get to that objective of having more sales. So it might be directly generating sales itself. It might be an e-commerce site. And there's a whole presentation in its own right around e-commerce. I'm not going to go deep into e-commerce today, although of course, many of the things that I'm talking about today in relation to brochure sites are going to be equally applicable to e-commerce sites. So it's likely to be about generating sales in some form or another, whether it's direct sales or whether it's in fact generating leads, generating people who pick up the phone and say, can you help me with my issue around whatever it is the service that you offer. Your website might be out there to provide more brand awareness. It might just be collateral that's used to back up when you make contacts out networking and you hand your business card to someone, or in the online world, you post your details in the chat box on Zoom. What's the first thing people do after the meeting? They probably go and have a look at your website. I've already had a look at the Arch Clinic website, by the way, Sarah. Yes, it could do with a little bit more of a facelift. So yes, it could be brand awareness. Well, peace and quiet. I put that on there not as a joke. Actually, I have clients for whom their website is useful as a means of answering customers' questions. So they don't want people emailing or phoning them going, how do I do this? Can I do that? They want people to phone up and say, I'd like to order X or Y. So you can use your website as a technical resource that stops people picking up the phone and asking you questions. Equally, other business owners will want people to phone up and ask those questions, because then at the end of that conversation you can say, and would you like to buy one? So, you know, there's two different ways you can go in the purpose of the website around the aspect of giving information. Do you want it to directly get people to call you, or do you want it to answer their questions? So there's some things to think about in the content that you put on your website. Okay, so that's just some further info. So Collateral I've mentioned. Portfolio sites. I have a portfolio page on my website, and I use it quite a lot when I'm talking to new customers who go, well, I don't really know what kind of website I want or what kind of look I want. And I'll go take a look at a portfolio, have a look at some of the stuff that you like in there. Equally, I've got a client who's a florist. She uses her website for people to have a look at flowers before they pick up the phone or walk into her shop. She really likes them to have browsed through what she's got online and say, well, I'd like that style of design or this style of design. You're probably wanting to get a good search engine position for your website. So you need to think about the search engine optimization aspects of the content that you're putting on the site. You might be using it for blogging. Now, you could be blogging for many reasons. You could be blogging for the benefit of SEO. You could be blogging because it gives you content that you can push out via social media. So you might be using the blogging aspect of a WordPress site or another platform. And then finally, we've got the e-commerce stroke bookings. We've got the direct transactional stuff of people buying your product or buying your service directly online. So whatever the purpose of your website, there are some things that are absolute givens that you must think about. You've got to think about first impressions, visual appearance. We heard from Bex Neal a few weeks back about the importance of visual design in establishing the feel and the personality of your brand. It's important that you have your website looking right, and it's important that it's consistent with all the other material. That first impression really counts. It has to look professional. It has to appeal to the right kind of market. If you're in a corporate market, you might want a blue, cool look. If you're a New Forest mark producer, you probably want something that looks funky and organic. Very different styles of design. But it's not just about visual stuff. We've all had the frustrating experience of going to a website and actually not being able to work out where the hell to go for the information that we want. The website's not been put together with the needs of the user in mind. It's usually been put together with the needs of the business owner in mind and doesn't reflect how real people would interact with it. A very good thing to do can be to get other people, friends and family, people who perhaps don't know your business, to try and use the website and see how they get on with it. And if they get stuck trying to find their way through the navigation, it's not just them being stupid, it's you being stupid in not making a website that they can use. So think about navigation. I'll mention this further later on. And then we come to readability. We come to the style of content, the type of content, how it's laid out. Too many websites are written in very scientific language or very formal business language when actually they're trying to appeal to people who just want to have a conversation. So think about the readability of the content. And think about the consistency. Think about making sure that the experience throughout your website is consistent, that elements of navigation are always in the same place, that page content looks similar. There isn't a discontinuity between the feel of the home page compared to the feel of some of the inner pages. It's all part of a branding experience. It's something that Jane or Vicky could talk about, I'm sure. So readability. It's a very important aspect of a website. Ultimately, for most sites, people are going to be reading content rather than looking at visual images and diagrams. So the copy that you've got on your site, the style in which it's written, the way in which it's presented, very, very important. Keep it simple, keep it usable. Don't aim for the upper end of recognition of your market. Think about the people who might struggle to find their way around a complicated site to read a long page of text. So make sure it's appealing to the eye. It's not great to be hit with a great big wall of small print text And I'm noticing a trend very much. Websites are moving towards larger and larger font sizes. That's partly because of the influence of mobile devices. We're now used to seeing quite large fonts on websites. And in fact, when we encounter one with small fonts on it, these days it looks really hard to read. There's a definite shift in the market there. So make sure it looks appealing and readable even before people have tried to read it, because if you don't, they won't try to read it. But break it up. Make use of subheadings within the text. Subheadings are really important. They visually stop it looking like a complete wall of text, but they also provide some signposts to what's in that page. A lot of people will speed read a page, particularly web pages, more than print. If you've got headlines subdividing the individual sections, it makes it easier to read. There's another strong reason for doing it. The search engines will place some weight on what they read in headings. They'll use those headings to signpost their own way through the content, and they'll index your page based on things like subheadings as well as the whole wall of text. So do break your text up into readable chunks. And lastly, don't forget different reading styles. Different people have got very different ways of reading. I mentioned speed reading, skimming through just now. Some people do that. They'll just look at pictures. They'll just look at headlines. They'll just look at brightly colored buttons. Other people will want to hoover up every last bit of information that you put on the page. Which is the right style to cater for? Well, the answer is there isn't a right answer to that. You have to cater for all styles of reading, and particularly you have to cater for people who speed read and for people who want lots of detail. So you need to think about both of those points of view in preparing your page content. So we've spoken about keeping the website up to date. And this is really important. It's really important for a number of reasons. Most obviously, it's interesting for visitors. If we go to a website and we see the last blog post was made in 2017, it tells us something around that website not being up to date, not being loved. So if we keep feeding fresh content into the website, interesting for visitors. It also gives you material that you can feed out to your social media platforms. And finally, it's really important from an SEO point of view, because the search engines want to give their searchers a good experience. They don't particularly want to land a searcher on a website that was last updated in 2017, because the website that was last updated in August 2020 has probably got more valuable content in it. So it's good from a search engine point of view to keep feeding fresh content in. And the final point is that these days it's easy to do. You shouldn't be having to phone up your web designer and email through a Word document to get your website updated. You should have access to a content management system, whether it's a WordPress site, a Wix site, a Squarespace site. They've all got good, easy to use editing interfaces these days. The excuse that it's not easy to update a website is really not something that's valid anymore. So do make sure that you make the most of keeping your website up to date. There's a few techie points I just want to mention in passing. First of all, your website absolutely has to be mobile friendly. If you look at the traffic statistics to websites, then depending on the market, you'll find that mobile traffic is typically at least 45%, and on a lot of sites, or a significant number of sites, particularly consumer-facing sites, it's up there around 75% of traffic coming from mobile devices. And yet, those of us building websites usually sit behind a screen on a desktop, and we design for that desktop. And then as a last thought, just before we launch, we look at how it looks on a mobile and troubleshoot it there. You've got to start by thinking about how it's going to look on mobile as well as how it's going to look on desktop. The pages on the website have to load fast. People are less and less patient. The bar is being raised in terms of how quickly we expect a web page to load. And it's also become something that the search engines take into account when they assign a ranking to a website. And again, Google wants to give a good experience to its visitors. And a good experience means websites that load fast. So Google will rank a website that loads fast more highly than one that loads slowly. Good news is it's fairly easy to achieve if you look after the technical stuff on the website. There's all sorts of things you can do around compressing images and using various means of getting fast loading off a server. Something else that's come to the fore over the last couple of years is using secure connections. Technically, it's known as HTTPS, but what that means is that your website is connecting securely. So if you're sending any contact form information, for example, back and forth, it's all encrypted in transit. I mean, GDPR massively raised the expectation of that, but it was getting to be important before that. One of the reasons it's getting to be important is, again, coming back to dear old Google and the other search engines, they'll give a higher ranking to a site that's got a secure connection. You know, they want to discourage people from running sites that don't have good secure connections. So it's fairly easy to set up. It may cost you an extra amount. Some hosting packages include it as standard, some don't. A couple of other things. Your website needs to be secure. It needs to not get hacked. It needs to all work nicely. So for goodness sake, make sure that the software is kept up to date. I maintain somewhere around about 100 different websites. I've got a centralized control panel. The average business owner doesn't have that kind of facility. You have to remember to log in and check things. I really would urge either that you log in at least weekly and check for any software updates, or you simply hand it over to someone else to do it for you as part of a total package. And finally, on the subject of security, do make sure your website is secure. If you're running a WordPress site or a Joomla site for that matter, or other content management systems, there are plugins that will give you good levels of security. They'll do things like lock out people that are trying to hack into your website so that they get locked out for an hour if they fail to log in after 6 attempts. So there's plenty you can do to make your website more secure. So those are the kind of technical things that you should think about. But I really don't want to make today about techie stuff, although I'm quite happy to talk about it if any of you do want to in the Q&A at the end. I really want to major on the benefits of making your website look good to the visitors. For me, one of the key things when you land on a website is making it easy for people to contact. Now, I spoke earlier about people using websites to stop people from contacting them with trivial questions, but actually for most of us, what we really want is people to pick up. So I always recommend that people put their contact details top right on every page on the website. It's kind of become the default place to put contact details. It's sort of where people expect to see them. You might almost certainly also put them in the footer. The reason for that is if someone's read all the way through a page and they're interested, at the end of it, they want to contact you. If your contact details are right there at the end of the page, then you make it easy for them. But I would also probably have a fairly prominent block in the page or a call to action in the text. Might well be a brightly colored button that says contact us, or it might just be a paragraph with a link in it. But either way, make it easy for people to contact, make it a call to action. There's all sorts of research and science around your choice of colors. You could do a whole presentation on that in its own right. It really has to be whatever works for the design that you've chosen for your website. But do make sure that your calls to action stand out. The other point I'd like to make on contact is a lot of people go, well, you told me to put my phone number at top right and you told me to put it in the footer, so we don't need a contact page, do we? I disagree with that point of view because most people go to a website and they expect to find a contact page. So don't do away with your contact page just because you've put the phone number in there prominently on every page. I think contact pages should still be there, should still be easy to find. Making websites easy to navigate. A lot of people think that it's enough just to have a menu at the top of the page. Often that grows into a complicated menu with drop downs and then with stuff flying out from the side of the menu, and they think, well, we've got everything in there, so that's fine. It's not fine. Particularly if you're on a mobile phone, then navigating a complicated menu is a real pain, or can be a real pain. So I would argue that you shouldn't just be relying on navigation. You should be linking within your pages. You should be linking to other parts of your website to help people get from one piece of information to some supporting piece of information, to get from there to your contact form. Links also matter from a search engine point of view. If you've got keyword-rich links within a page, that will help the search engines find their way around. You heard that from Mike in his presentation from the Marketing Collective a few weeks back. Really, really good advice. Make sure you've got good keyworded links. I had a conversation yesterday with someone who had put all their links as just saying, click here. And click here doesn't give any signal to the search engines. It doesn't give much signal to the user as to what they get when they click there. So if you're linking them to an inquiry form, put the words inquiry form in the link. So make sure you've got a number of different ways within the page for people to navigate around. And if it's your home page, that might consist of having not just text, but also good visual links. You might have photos or graphics about some of the services or products that you offer that give people who are more of a visual inclination than a reading inclination a way to find their way through to whatever it is you want to link to. That's particularly true with e-commerce sites. On an e-commerce site, don't just list your category names, show a little thumbnail image of the product or atypical product from that category, because people will lock straight onto that and they'll go, yeah, I want a laptop, not a desktop, or I want a mobile phone, not a laptop. So make use of images if you've got a product or you've got a service that lends itself to graphical representation. You're obviously a little bit stuffed if you're an accountant and it's all about numbers, but do make use of visual signposting if you can. And then we've got different types of user. I've spoken about different user behaviors, but you've also got different types of interests for user. You know, people who are of an older generation are probably more likely to read text. People of a younger generation, your so-called millennials and younger even, are more likely to perhaps click on a thumbnail of a video and watch some video rather than reading a load of text. So have a mix of different ways of presenting your content on a website. Videos, by the way, are a great way of presenting testimonials, because it really is quite difficult to fake a video testimonial. You know, you can fake written testimonials, can't you? I'm sure none of us would ever do that, but you can do. But if you've got a video of someone saying what a great product you made or what a great service you offer, video is a really good way of presenting that. But video is also good for how-tos. And on video, I would say put your videos on YouTube, host them on YouTube. Don't stick them on your own server. There's good technical reasons for not sticking them on your own server, but there's also a good search engine reason for sticking them on YouTube, because you'll start to get found, or potentially you'll start to get found in YouTube searches, as well as getting found through the content that you've put on your website. Google owns YouTube, so guess what? YouTube gets pretty good ranking on Google searches. So think about the ways in which different users will take in your content, and make sure that you present content in a number of different ways that will appeal to different types of users. And then finally, at the end of it all, it's not the be all and end all, but it's something that has to be in place, are those points around making your website fast and secure, so that it's a good experience for people and it's a safe experience. So those really are my key points. I mean, I could start talking about editing interfaces. I can start talking about the different things that you can do with websites by way of forms and membership systems and e-commerce stores and so forth. But riding across all of those different particular uses of a website are these kind of guidelines that I think are really important. And they're the kinds of things that I find myself every day telling people about, particularly that one about catering for people who skim read versus people who read every last detail. A lot of people think only that someone like themselves is going to come and look at their website. So do think about the different types of user. Some web development specialists, people who work on areas like user experience, will actually have different personas of user. It's quite common practice in marketing as well. You know, what's a 45-year-old mother of kids going to want from this site versus what's a 18-year-old A-level student going to want. You know, they'll put together different personas. So do think about the different usages that might be made of your website, and do test it against how real people get on with it. Actually ask someone to browse through your website, see what they have to say, take it on board, update it. So that's kind of my 15-minute view on things to think about to make your website more engaging, to make it connect better with your audience. So I'm going to chuck it open to the floor at this point and see what we've got by way of questions and comments from anyone. And I see Phil putting your hand up. Phil.
Hi, thanks for that. That was really interesting. I just wondered your thoughts. Well, on my Tech Wizard website, I've got an animated picture in the background just of waves at the sea. It's been like sort of relaxing site, but presumably that's going to slow the website down because it's got to load that image in. How would you sort of decide whether to put something in that makes the website look better versus taking it out to make it load faster?
It's a really good question. It's a good question to ask, Phil. And it is more and more common to have video backgrounds, and there's some great eye-catching websites that have those video backgrounds. I think to some extent you've got to be careful with them, and I hope you haven't got that background behind your main text, because it can be very distracting. If you've got anyone who finds it at all difficult to read text, then having certainly a moving image or even a static sort of faded out image behind text is not a great experience. And I quite often tell people, yeah, your images are great, but if you fade them out and put them behind the text, actually it's a double loser, because you're making your text more difficult to read and actually you're just degrading the image. You're better off putting it as a nice photograph in its own right. But I think video used as a heading can look really eye-catching, and it's a bit of a trend at the moment. In fact, I put some video on earlier this week for a client of mine. They've just organised a Round Britain rowing event, and we had some great footage from one of the teams of them actually rowing in high seas, and we've put that on their website. It really looks fantastic. As far as slowing the site down goes, you don't need to have full kind of 4K resolution to that video. So you could consider using quite highly compressed video. You could consider using only a fairly small clip, so it's cycling around. I mean, your waves in particular would lend themselves to actually just being quite a short clip that recycles on probably even a 20-second, certainly a 30-second basis.
Right, yeah.
So it's quite a small file being loaded. So, and then also the other point I would think I would add in to reply to that question is you could make the video load last. So you could defer the loading of that video. So
that's a good point, yeah.
Your text loads quickly. So if your text loads within, say, a second and a half, but the video takes 3 seconds to fill in behind it, okay, it looks slightly glitchy from a user experience point of view, but the search engines won't see it as a slow site.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And Sarah had a question in the chat, and then over to Jane. Sarah asks, we've been recommended WordPress. Is there any other alternative we ought to consider?
Right. So I'm a WordPress specialist, so you've probably asked the wrong guy that question. What I'll say, rather than blowing my own trumpet or that of my own platform, WordPress is powering something like 45, getting on for 50% of the world's websites. I think that's a misleading statistic, because if you were to look at small businesses, I bet you'd find it's up around 75%. Personally, I think it's a very good product. I know, Matthew, you looked at Squarespace for one of your sites, didn't you? I'm not sure whether you went with it or not, but Squarespace is quite a good, solid platform. Personally, I consider WordPress gives the most flexibility in terms of the maximum number of possible extensions that you can add to it to do it pretty much any function that you could think of. So my view is it's a pretty good place to start from. So I see Phil said he's using Wix. Seems pretty good, but difficult to compare. Yeah, I mean, I have maintained a Wix site for somebody. personally, I found it hard work, but it was because I wasn't used to it. It's partly what you get used to, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Jane, you are.
Yeah, what I wanted to talk about was something to do with video, but actually just on that point, because we've got quite a lot of experience of working with all sorts of different types of websites, we are coming round to feeling that by and large, WordPress is the best for nearly everything, mainly because of what Rob just said, is that it's so flexible. So for example, we've recently built a new WordPress site for one of our clients and also added WooCommerce, which is their e-commerce plugin, which is a really sensible thing for loads of people to be doing now, to have a little bit of e-commerce or a little bit of functionality to enable online ordering. And it's brilliant, and it's brought in the most fantastic amount of additional revenue for that business without us even starting to market it. So we have set up the pages really well for SEO, but we haven't actually marketed it at all, and yet it's working to do it. Lymington.com is in Joomla, which is a great big beast of an engine, and it's fantastic, and I love working in it because it's so structured and it's so easy to see what to do. But all those others like Wix and Squarespace, and even Shopify, because Shopify is great for e-commerce, but it's not very nice. And if you wanted to have a nice brochure site as well, I don't think you'd want to use Shopify. And the others are probably a little bit limited. So I think that's worth bearing in mind, and especially this thing about in an online age, it's going to make more and more sense wherever possible to offer things online. And the thing I was just going to say about video, picking up on what you said, Rob, was when you said host on YouTube, we find it really good on Lymington.com that we're able to pick up anybody's video from YouTube just by picking up the embed code. We can then embed it in the page, and anybody can do this on their website. If you pick up the embed code, your video is then not taking up space on your own website, but you're still getting the absolute brilliant impact of it right in the middle of your page. And then I had another little thing to say about video, which is just starting, which is that we ourselves have been a bit slow to get around to making our own videos, but we've just started, and I don't know if anybody has seen these yet. We've started doing little short Instagram stories, which are getting great response. They're really easy to do because we're just pointing our phones at something or somebody or something that's going on, and then doing a little commentary. And we've even extended that now to doing a little interview. So we can actually talk to somebody doing whatever they do. So we're going to start doing it to promote businesses as well. And then you just upload that to YouTube, and then you can, sorry, the Instagram one, you have to do portrait shape. I expect you know those who use Instagram. And then the YouTube one, you have to do landscape shape. So you do actually have to do it twice. But if you make it about 30 seconds, it can be quite informative and quite quick to do, quick to upload, and great. So that's my bit.
Great. Thanks, Jane. Sarah, did you want to come back about WordPress, or what inspired your question?
Really, what's inspired our question is that as we've really got to sort of do a complete relaunch of our website. So it's quite a big thing. We've got a lot of therapists who are stakeholders in the website, and they all want us to start linking to their websites. As you can imagine, with that many stakeholders, they've all got different platforms to and so as the therapy centre manager, I mean, Rob's quite right. You know, my job is to promote the facility and to promote Arch Clinic. It isn't to promote their businesses. So I'm very clear about my purpose here. However, it's very important that we also are able to facilitate our stakeholders from adding content to our own website and enhancing it with YouTube videos and all sorts of things that they do that help us to keep our facility looking really interesting and useful and up to date. So I'm listening to all this in the round because the quote that we've had to rebuild the website on a WordPress platform is £1,600. I don't know whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. Some of the therapists here say it's far too expensive. We need to go and get another quote. So, you know, certainly the person who did the original one back in 2015 for me and updated it in 2018. And I've got a lovely guy who does the updates, but you're right, Rob, it's a pain. You know, I have to send him a huge Word document. He hates me, and and I try not to annoy him more than I need to, but it means we don't stay as up to date as we should do. So I you know, the drive is to move now. I also want to be able to do a lot more myself. You know, I really object to having to get somebody else to do things when we've got something to say. Like with COVID, we had like a weekly update, and yeah, it was just, so yeah, it would be good to be able to have a little bit more control.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'll let Rob just conclude in a second, but all I would say about the price is if it's going to bring you more than £1,600 worth of business, then it's worth spending more. So just think about your return on that.
Yeah, it won't. I mean, the whole point about Arch Clinic is that it's our revenue comes from leasing the rooms. So we're pretty full. We've got a great deal more space to let, which is a lovely place to be. But you know, that doesn't mean we're secure. Any of our current leaseholders can leave us at any minute. So we you know, we can't rest on our laurels at all. And it's really important that we, I mean, one of our big missions is to make the therapies accessible. And that means that we promote the therapies and how to access them really well. So we're much more of a community facility really in that regard. So we commercially, yeah, it's important, but it's much more important for the therapists to be commercial, so they have their own websites for that.
Excellent. Yeah, no, thank you. So Rob, over to you for a quick conclusion, because Boris watchers are standing by. He's about to...
Okay, I didn't realise we've got that extra incentive to get off the call.
Yes.
I do have form in making Matthew's meetings overrun, or at least when his back was turned. I could quite easily talk to you for 10 minutes, Sarah, so I must be very careful not to do that right now.
Well, I can always talk to you offline, Rob, if you could put your email up on the chat.
Yeah, I did actually call your website up while we were doing the around the room bit. I had a quick sly look at it. So I'll talk briefly about the pricing side of it, and then I want to talk more about the content management side of it. On the pricing sounds about right on my very, very quick take on the complexity of that site. I don't think you're being ripped off. And equally, I don't think you should be worried that it's too cheap, because you can get too cheap with websites and end up finding you're dealing with some 16-year-old student who actually hasn't got any insight into business. So you're probably about right on the pricing. As Matthew says, the question is what return you get on it. And you get what you pay for the most part with websites. You know, you could spend £2,000 and get something that's even more whizzy. You could spend £1,000 and get something that's slightly less whizzy. It's what you want for the money. I just want to say on the content management front, so Jane and I are currently working on a new website for a major organisation involved in healthcare in the New Forest. And how much of a nightmare is it, Jane, to deal with having 6 different stakeholders in the content of that website?
I think it's probably not a problem that most small businesses are going to have, but yes, it's absolutely gigantic, and it's because content is the enormous part of a website, and it's got to come from somewhere, and somebody's got to provide it. And when you've got an entity like that where there are so many different contributors to that website, controlling it is an enormous challenge.
So my message to you, based on the experience that Jane and I have had, and we've both had it with many other clients as well, where you've got multiple stakeholders, you're going to have to take quite a strong steering position at the heart of that process and make sure that you've got a vision on what they want, because you'll get different therapists with radically different directions they want to go, and you are going to have to manage that expectation, because otherwise, I'll come back to my message about consistency, you won't have consistency across that site. So it needs to be thought through at the outset.
Thank you.
Great. So that brings us to about 2 minutes to. So thanks, Rob, and as always, you know, expressing that very clearly, and that'll be very useful to have for people to look at. I'm sure if anyone wants to follow up with Rob afterwards, do you want to quickly just put your
I'm going to do that.
contact details there, and then people can connect with you. Next week, we return to welcoming Jo back online. Those of you who were with us on the 26th of August, we seem to have summer holiday fever, and she wasn't able to connect, but she's going to talk about connecting remotely and hopefully successfully this next week on the 16th of September. And her focus is on getting people to be comfortable connecting remotely. And so it would be very good if we could all encourage others to join us next week and get involved in that. But in the meantime, Rob, thank you so much. It's not easy putting something across in a short period of time and doing so clearly, particularly when people not really sure what you're talking about, but sort of know. But that's good for you, because that's why we pay people like you to do it for us. So thank you for that and for guiding us through that. And have a good day, everyone. And good luck if the announcements in the next few minutes affect you.
Boris is about to speak now, is he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
4 o'clock.
Okay. But again,
Matthew, are we staying online for a chat or not?
Yeah, just a quick discussion for the NFBP team. That would be good. Thank you.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
right. Thanks.
everyone.
Just a quick
Sorry,
Thanks, Sarah.
question.
Thanks.
Yeah, Jim.
Caroline, lovely to see you again. Phil, good to meet you. Steve.